I rise today to congratulate the French government for taking aggressive and appropriate action to arrest and kill the terrorists responsible for last Friday's vicious attack in Paris that resulted in 129 killed and over 300 wounded. We all pray for the full recovery of those wounded and note that everywhere within our country, we see the American flag at half-staff, along with many displaying the flag of our ally France. So the good news today is that the mastermind of several terrorist plots and the plot killing so many last Friday is dead. Abdelhamid Aboud died in the same fashion as his victims. So be it. Vive la France. Continuez le combat. Keep up the fight. Mr. President, as our nation memorializes those who perished in France, it is the absolute wrong time for President Obama and this administration to be putting forth a plan to relocate Guantanamo detainees to the United States mainland. The absolute wrong time. Now we learn that the administration has delayed the much publicized but secret plan to close Guantanamo and bring terrorists to the United States. White House spokesman Josh Earnest said, "I don't have any additional guidance for you, but the plan will come relatively soon." He's been saying that for some time. Others state the plan could even be released while the president is gone for the G20 meeting in Turkey. As a personal aside, I might suggest he tried to move the terrorists there. Mr. President, the reason President Obama delayed the plan is that we had a terrorist attack in France. France has gone to war, and the United States is on high alert. Apparently, he has tossed this decision in public announcement regarding the plan to the Department of Defense, who has stated there is nothing imminent. Thank goodness for that. Now, beyond the security threat this poses to our communities in Kansas and in South Carolina or Colorado, the sites with which this administration has surveyed for potential relocation, there has been Mr. President, no intelligence assessment regarding the danger of moving enemy combatants from Guantanamo to the United States. That's amazing. The question is, how can the administration ask Kansans or Coloradans or South Carolinians or any Americans to paint a bullseye on their community without providing assurances that moving detainees to the United States will not pose a threat to them or our national security? It seems unfathomable. And yet this president is proposing to do just that. This president's unending affinity for executive order risks overriding his attorney general's view of the law, the advice of those at the Department of Defense, especially those close to Fort Leavenworth and military law enforcement. It goes against the will of the Congress, which voted in this body 91-3 to maintain a prohibition on moving detainees to the mainland. And there's absolutely no intelligence to support the move, none. In short, the Senate, Congress, Department of Defense, the Attorney General, and the American people have spoken. Yesterday, I wrote the Department of Defense Secretary Carter to ask whether an intelligence report has been done to support the administration claims that Guantanamo Bay is a recruiting tool for ISIS and other terrorist organizations. Some people believe that. Common sense tells you, however, moving detainees to the mainland would be a greater recruiting tool for ISIS and other terrorist organizations. I asked if an assessment showed detainment in the U.S. would decrease recruitment, or did an intelligence product show that national security threats would decrease if any enemy combatants are held in the United States? From my discussions with members of this body on the Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee, the answer is they have no comprehensive intelligence assessment. Simply put, an assessment regarding the transfers of detainees to the mainland has not been done. So I have asked the Secretary Carter and the Department of Defense to ensure an assessment is completed. To do otherwise would be irresponsible and reckless. How can the President of the United States allow ISIS to paint a target on those who live near what would become Gitmo North? And no community in the United States wants that label. Fort Leavenworth in particular, Mr. President, is not a suitable replacement for Gitmo. It is the intellectual center of the Army. It hosts our nation's best and brightest warfighters at the Command and General Staff College, which also hosts 100 international officers every year. I want to remind my colleagues just how important Fort Leavenworth's mission is to the Army and to our national security, and the risk that this entire mission would be endangered by making it a terrorist prison. Fort Leavenworth is home to the United States Army's Training and Doctrine Command's Combined Armed Center. The Combined Arms Center oversees 13 schools, including the Command and General Staff College. And most recently, Fort Leavenworth was named the Army University, giving our intellectual center of the Army an official title. Since 1881, the Command and General Staff College and the Combined Arms Center have been engaged in the primary mission of preparing the Army and its leaders for war. In order to accomplish critical missions, Fort Leavenworth develops and integrates Army leader development, doctrine education, lessons learned, functional training, training support, training development, and proponent responsibilities in order to support mission command and to prepare the Army to successfully conduct unified land operations in a joint interagency, intergovernmental, multinational environment. A lot of words. Big mission. Important mission. To degrade Fort Leavenworth to a terrorist prison would have ominous repercussions on our professional military and the value it serves every American and our national security. In addition, we must consider how our allies will respond to having enemy combatants so close to their top military leaders training at Fort Leavenworth. In my effort to reach out to embassies tied to the school, all have expressed their deep support for the International Military Officers Division, its value to their military and security, and the importance of maintaining the program at Fort Leavenworth. There is every possibility that given the countries who participate in the Command and General Staff College would reconsider their participation given the relocation of terrorists. This would bring really negative consequences and represent a terrible detriment to the partnership building that takes place during their coursework. It would mean a loss for international cooperation, for American military education, and our national security. There are so many imperative factors that must be examined at Fort Leavenworth, in Colorado, and in South Carolina, factors that we cannot ignore. The fact that the FBI has nearly 1,000 investigations into ISIS activity within the U.S. and all 50 states, that ISIS released a video right after the attacks in Paris stating that the U.S. was next, and most importantly, again, the fact that we are not dealing with everyday criminals. The detainees currently held at Guantanamo Bay are enemy combatants, terrorists, individuals with no remorse, and with a recidivism rate at 30%, a strong desire to return to the battlefield. The reality is these individuals and the organizations they support pose the greatest risk to national security we face today. This administration should not obstruct the will of Congress, reflecting the voice of the American people, which has prohibited this White House from transferring detainees from Gitmo to the U.S. every year since 2009 when we first won this battle. And we won the battle back then. Why do we have to repeat it now? If the president believes he can act without consequences, he is wrong. Again, 91 senators voted in favor of this prohibition just last week when we passed the National Defense Authorization Act. That's not just a majority, that is a veto-proof majority. Article 2 of the Constitution does not provide this president, any president, with the power to ignore the law. Just the other night, in a teletown hall meeting, caller after caller asked if the president's actions are constitutional. How can the president do this when Congress has prohibited funding, was the question. In my view, and that of the president's own attorney general, if the president acts by executive order, he is acting unconstitutionally. I agree with our founding fathers like George Mason, who said, "When the same man or set of men holds the sword and the purse, there is an end to liberty." And James Madison, who said it is particularly dangerous to give the keys of the Treasury and the command of the Army into the same hands. Now, I have mentioned the Congress, the merits of Fort Leavenworth, the Constitution, but what I have not mentioned yet is our service members. We have asked so much of our men and women in uniform over the past 14 years. We have asked them to go into harm's way before every bit of equipment was ready. We have asked them to deploy and redeploy with almost no dwell time. We've asked them to extend their stays, and we've put them in more places across the globe than any other period in history. And they've done it all without hesitation or complaint because we have the best fighting force in the history of the world. But I am unwilling to ask them to take on the challenge of guarding enemy combatants in the United States and put their families at risk for harassment, kidnapping, other terror tactics homegrown terrorists and foreign fighters have used or will use. Our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and Marines do not live anonymously when their families are stationed with them, as is the case at Fort Leavenworth. I believe, along with many that have worn the uniform, the attacks in Benghazi may have broken the nation's promise to never leave a man in harm's way. Mr. President, on a personal note, when I signed up to enlist in the United States Marine Corps, I was told that if I was in harm's way, I would never left behind. That's what the Marine Corps could do for me. The Corps would have my back, either by squad, if I got in harm's way, or they'd send the platoon, or the company, or the battalion, or the regiment, or the division, or the whole Marine Corps. And I believe that. I still believe it, as the senior Marine in the Congress. The Marines would have my back. It has been the same for generations before me and hopefully generations after. That is until now. If we are going to ask our men and women to fight ISIS or to put their families at risk, they have to know that we have their back. Until that bond is restored and we have a president that is willing to lead instead of following, our nation remains vulnerable to every terrorist organization and cell in the world. We must put national security back as our top priority. It must be our first duty in Congress and by the Commander-in-Chief. Mr. President, I stand here because America's national security is my top priority, and bringing Guantanamo detainees to the United States is not putting our nation's security above politics, campaign promises, or anything else. I yield the floor.